Welcome. You found your way here, to this quiet place beside the water, and that finding is no accident. Perhaps you're seeking rest. Perhaps you're seeking answers. Perhaps you simply need a refuge from the world's relentless noise. Whatever brought you to this threshold, know that you are welcome here. For the next 2 hours, I invite you to set down what you've been carrying. Not forever, just for now. The world will wait. Your worries will still be there when you return, but right now, in this moment, you have permission to simply be. This is a tea house that exists beside a river, and tonight you are its guest. Over the course of this evening, I'll share with you 100 facts about herbs, about steam, about the river's ancient voice, but these aren't just facts. They're woven together into a single, continuous story. A story about how the natural world speaks to us in the language of chemistry and beauty, how simple plants carry wisdom that predates human language, how water moving over stone can teach your nervous system things your mind has forgotten. You don't need to do anything special. You don't need to sit in any particular way or clear your mind or achieve anything at all. Just listen. Let the words wash over you like the river itself. If you drift away into your own thoughts, that's fine. If you fall asleep, that's fine too. There's no test at the end. No wrong way to receive what's being offered. All I ask is that you allow yourself this time. This space. This ceremony of attention and care that has been practiced in tea houses for centuries, passed down from teacher to student, from generation to generation, and now offered to you. The tea master is lighting the first candle. The water is beginning to warm. The river outside murmurs its eternal greeting. Let's begin. There's a place where the world slows down, where time moves at the pace of rising steam and the river's eternal whisper. Tonight, we're settling into a riverside tea house as evening falls, and I'm going to share its secrets with you, the science of calm that lives in these walls, the ancient wisdom steeped in every cup, the natural symphony that's been playing here for centuries. There's a place where the world slows down, where time moves at the pace of rising steam and the river's eternal whisper. Tonight, we're settling into a riverside tea house as evening falls, and I'm going to share its secrets with you, the science of calm that lives in these walls, the ancient wisdom steeped in every cup, the natural symphony that's been playing here for centuries. Let me paint you into this moment. The tea house sits on wooden pillars above the water, and as you step inside, the first thing that happens is remarkable. Your nervous system begins to shift within 30 to 90 seconds of hearing flowing water. The rhythmic, non-repetitive sound of the river triggers what researchers call the blue mind response. Your brain waves literally slow down, moving from the rapid beta waves of daily stress toward the gentle alpha waves of relaxation. The river isn't just pleasant background noise, it's rewiring your awareness with every murmur. The tea master is preparing the evening's first brew. Watch the water in the iron kettle, it's reaching that perfect temperature, around 175 degrees Fahrenheit, ideal for green tea. And here's something beautiful, steam itself carries negative ions into the air, the same molecules you'd breathe near a waterfall or after rainfall. These invisible particles attach to dust, pollen, and other positives in the atmosphere, literally cleaning the air you're breathing. But they do something more, they increase oxygen flow to your brain, promoting that alert yet calm state that makes tea houses feel almost sacred. The steam rises in delicate spirals, and if you watch carefully, you'll notice it follows the subtle air currents in the room, mapping the invisible. Tonight's first tea is chamomile, and the tea master is adding something special, a few leaves of lemon balm. Let me tell you about these two gentle allies. Chamomile contains apigenin, a compound that binds to the same brain receptors as anti-anxiety medications, but gently, naturally. It's been doing this for thousands of years, long before we had the science to explain why a simple flower could ease a troubled mind. The ancient Egyptians dedicated chamomile to their sun god Ra, perhaps understanding instinctively what we now measure in laboratories. And that lemon balm? Lemon balm increases GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, in the brain, the neurotransmitter that tells your racing thoughts to slow down. Studies have shown that people who consume lemon balm before stressful tasks report feeling calmer and perform better. The tea master knows this not from research papers, but from decades of observation, watching guests arrive tense and leave softened. Outside, the river is entering that magical hour, not quite day, not yet night. The Japanese have a word for this, tasagare, the time when things blur and blend. The river's voice changes with the light. What was bright and chattering becomes deeper, more resonant. Moving water creates what acousticians call pink noise, a sound where every octave carries equal energy. Unlike white noise, which can be harsh, pink noise mimics patterns found throughout nature, rustling leaves, steady rainfall, the river's endless conversation with its banks. Your brain recognizes this pattern as safe, primordial, the sound our ancestors fell asleep to for millions of years before we ever built walls to shut it out. Here, the walls are thin on purpose. The tea master brings your cup, and before you drink, you simply hold it. Feel that warmth in your palms. Holding a warm beverage literally increases feelings of interpersonal warmth and trust toward others. It's not metaphor, it's the insula, a region deep in your brain that processes both physical warmth and social connection, unable to fully distinguish between the two. The simple act of wrapping your hands around this cup is making you more open, more present, more here. As you take your first sip, notice how the chamomile and lemon balm work together. The tea doesn't hit you, it arrives slowly, like the evening itself. Herbal infusions release their compounds gradually over 5 to 15 minutes, which is why traditional tea ceremonies involve multiple small cups rather than one large mug. You're not consuming chamomile, you're entering into relationship with it, sip by sip, breath by breath. Look around the tea house now. There's a reason it's built mostly of wood and natural materials. Wood absorbs and releases moisture naturally, regulating humidity in a way that keeps the air comfortable and reduces the growth of dust mites and mold. But beyond the practical, wood carries its own subtle scent, compounds called phytoncides that trees release to protect themselves. When you smell cedar or pine or cypress in this space, you're breathing in the tree's immune system, and remarkably, it boosts yours too. Studies in forest therapy have shown that these compounds increase natural killer cells in human blood for up to a week after exposure. The river is darkening now. The tea master lights a single candle, and something shifts again. You're here, in this moment, between the steam and the river and the herbs slowly unfurling their ancient knowledge in hot water. Candlelight flickers at a frequency that encourages slower breathing. Your body unconsciously synchronizes with its rhythm, the way it does with any gentle, repetitive motion. One breath. Another. The river murmurs. The steam rises. You're held in this pocket of peace, and there are 90 more secrets still to share. The candle flame settles into its gentle dance, and the tea master is already preparing the next infusion. This time, you notice sprigs of fresh peppermint joining the pot, their leaves still glistening with evening dew from the garden just outside. Peppermint contains menthol, which doesn't actually lower temperature but tricks your brain's cold receptors into firing, creating a cooling sensation that can reduce perceived stress and mental fatigue by up to 20%. Ancient Roman philosopher Pliny the Elder wrote that the very smell of mint reanimates the spirit, and modern neuroscience confirms he wasn't being poetic. Menthol actively stimulates the hippocampus, the brain region responsible for memory and emotional regulation. The tea master crushes one leaf between their fingers, and suddenly the whole room breathes differently. You might notice that your breathing has changed since you arrived. It's not something you decided to do, it simply happened. That's the river working on you again. The human nervous system contains specialized neurons called baroreceptors that detect rhythmic environmental patterns, and when exposed to consistent natural rhythms like flowing water, your heart rate variability, the subtle changes between heartbeats that indicate nervous system flexibility, actually increases, which is a marker of resilience and calm. Athletes train for years to achieve what this river is giving you freely, a body that can shift smoothly between states, that isn't locked in tension. You've been here less than an hour, and already your heartbeat is learning the river's ancient language. The peppermint tea arrives in a different cup this time, slightly larger, wider at the rim. The tea master is deliberate about these things, and there's wisdom in it. The shape and size of a teacup actually affects how we perceive flavor and temperature. Wider rims expose more surface area to air, cooling the tea more quickly and allowing volatile aromatic compounds to reach your nose more efficiently, which means you taste with your sense of smell as much as your tongue. In fact, up to 80% of what we call taste is actually olfaction. This is why food tastes bland when you have a cold. Right now, with steam carrying peppermint's essential oils directly to your olfactory bulb, you're experiencing the tea in its fullness, the way it was meant to be known. Outside, the river has fully entered night. You can barely see it now, but somehow it sounds closer, more present. Darkness does this, it sharpens what remains. In the absence of visual stimulation, your brain redistributes processing power to your other senses within minutes, a phenomenon called cross-modal plasticity, which is why sounds seem richer and smells more vivid in darkness. The tea house at night becomes a different place entirely, not because it has changed, but because you have, your neural pathways literally reorganizing to meet the dark with different tools. The tea master has worked in this space for 30 years and knows that guests who come at night leave more transformed. The darkness is not an absence. It's a presence that teaches you to sense differently. For this next cup, something special, lavender and passionflower, a combination the tea master calls the evening's embrace. Lavender contains over 100 chemical compounds, but the star performer is linalool, a terpene alcohol that doesn't just smell pleasant, it actually reduces the activity of glutamate, your brain's primary excitatory neurotransmitter, while simultaneously enhancing GABA activity, creating a gentle, bilateral calming effect that researchers have measured in brain scans showing reduced activity in the amygdala, your fear center, within 30 minutes of inhalation alone. You don't even need to drink it. Just breathing above this cup is shifting your neurochemistry, unwinding the tight springs of the day. And the passionflower? There's a story there. Spanish conquistadors named it for the Passion of Christ. They saw symbols of the crucifixion in its intricate blooms, but the plant itself had been easing troubled minds for centuries before Europeans arrived. Passionflower works through a compound called chrysin, which enhances the binding efficiency of GABA to its receptors in the brain, essentially making your existing calming neurotransmitters work more effectively rather than adding foreign substances. It's like tuning an instrument rather than replacing it, helping your own biochemistry find its natural rhythm, which is why it doesn't create dependency or dull your awareness but rather clarifies it, sharpens it toward peace. The indigenous peoples of the Americas understood this deeply. They used passionflower not to escape awareness but to become more present, more awake to the moment. Listen closely now. The river's voice has layers you might not have noticed before. There's the surface chatter, yes, but underneath, do you hear it, a deeper drone, almost subsonic. Rivers produce infrasound, frequencies below the range of human hearing, typically below 20 Hz, that we don't consciously perceive as sound but that our bodies detect through bone conduction and the vestibular system in our inner ear. These low frequencies have been shown to induce meditative states and even mild euphoria, which may explain why humans have built sacred spaces near moving water for millennia, instinctively seeking something our ancestors felt but couldn't name. You're not just listening to the river. You're feeling it in your bones, in the fluid of your inner ear, in places that don't have language but know truth when they encounter it. The tea master refills your cup without asking. They can read the room, read you, the way you might read a favorite book. The steam rises again, carrying lavender's complex perfume. Steam from herbal infusions doesn't just carry scent molecules, it also increases the humidity of the air to an optimal range of 40 to 60%, which is ideal for respiratory health, mucosal membrane function, and even the survival of airborne viruses, which thrive in both very dry and very humid conditions but struggle in this middle range. Meaning the simple act of brewing tea is creating a microclimate that protects everyone in the room while simultaneously delivering therapeutic compounds. Through multiple pathways, inhalation, ingestion, and even dermal absorption from the warm, humid air. The tea ceremony isn't just ritual or comfort. It's environmental engineering perfected over centuries. Notice how your shoulders have dropped. When did that happen? You might not remember deciding to relax them. The act of sitting and holding a warm cup while exposed to rhythmic natural sounds creates what psychologists call embodied cognition. Your physical posture and sensory experience directly influence your mental and emotional state, not as a secondary effect but as a primary mechanism. Your mind doesn't just inhabit your body, it is your body, and by placing your body in this specific configuration, seated, warm hands, rhythmic sound, aromatic air, you're giving your mind no choice but to shift. To soften, to release what it's been carrying. This is why the tea house is arranged exactly as it is. Every element is invitation. Every detail is doorway. The last tea of this hour will be rose hip and hibiscus, slightly tart, a gentle awakening within the calm. Rose hips contain more vitamin C by weight than citrus fruits, up to 1,700 mg per 100 grams compared to oranges 53, and this isn't just nutritional trivia. Vitamin C is a precursor to several neurotransmitters including norepinephrine, which helps regulate attention and response to stress, meaning this tart, slightly sweet tea is literally providing your brain with raw materials to rebuild its stress management systems, to repair what the day may have depleted, to prepare you not just for sleep but for tomorrow's challenges with restored biochemical reserves. The tea master knows this not from nutrition labels but from watching guests return, week after week, drawn to something they can feel but might not be able to name. The river continues its endless conversation. The steam rises and falls. You're 40 minutes into the evening now, and you've traveled further than distance can measure. There are still 60 secrets waiting in the darkness, in the herbs, in the water's ancient voice. A time is passing like water through fingers, and yet you feel no urgency to be anywhere else. The tea master moves through the space like part of the evening itself, unhurried, certain, present. For this next phase of the evening, something different emerges from the tea master's collection: dried Tulsi leaves, what some call holy basil, paired with a few threads of saffron that catch the candlelight like tiny flames. Tulsi, or Ocimum sanctum, contains eugenol and ursolic acid, compounds that function as adaptogens, meaning they don't simply sedate or stimulate but rather help your body maintain homeostasis regardless of external stressors. If your cortisol is too high, adaptogens help lower it. If too low, they support its rise, working like a thermostat rather than a heater or air conditioner. Which is why traditional Ayurvedic medicine called Tulsi, the incomparable one, it meets you exactly where you are. And helps you find balance from that starting point, never imposing a single state but rather supporting your unique path back to equilibrium. The tea master places 3 leaves in your cup with the reverence usually reserved for precious things, because in the economy of well-being, this is precious, a plant that listens to your body's needs. And those saffron threads, no bigger than eyelashes, floating in the darkening water. They carry their own remarkable story. Saffron contains crocin and safranal, compounds that have been shown in clinical trials to be as effective as certain pharmaceutical antidepressants for mild to moderate depression, working by increasing the availability of serotonin and dopamine in the brain, but unlike synthetic medications, these compounds also possess powerful antioxidant properties that protect neurons from oxidative stress and inflammation, meaning saffron doesn't just alter your mood chemistry temporarily, it actively protects the very structures responsible for mood regulation, rebuilding the foundation while addressing the immediate experience, which perhaps explains why Persian physicians prescribed saffron for melancholy over 1,000 years before we had the neuroscience to understand why it worked. 3 threads. That's all it takes. The tea master knows that more isn't better, precision is better. As you bring this golden tea to your lips, notice the aroma first. It's unlike anything you've encountered tonight, earthy, slightly sweet, complex. The human nose can distinguish over 1 trillion different scents, far more than previously believed, and each scent molecule that enters your nasal cavity binds to receptors that send signals directly to your limbic system, the ancient brain region that processes emotion and memory, which is why certain smells can transport you instantly to childhood or to places you haven't thought about in years. This direct pathway bypasses the rational, filtering parts of your brain, which means scent affects you more immediately and more deeply than any other sense, working beneath language, beneath thought, in the realm of pure feeling where the tea ceremony ultimately does its deepest work. The Tulsi and saffron aren't just flavoring water. They're speaking directly to the oldest parts of you, the parts that remember how to be calm because they existed long before you learned how to worry. The river outside has settled into its night voice now, deeper, slower, like the difference between conversation and prayer. Moving water at night produces different acoustic frequencies than during the day because cooler air is denser and carries sound differently, causing lower frequencies to propagate more efficiently while higher frequencies dissipate more quickly. This means the river's nighttime voice is naturally richer in bass tones, which resonate more closely with the human body's own low-frequency rhythms, heartbeat, breathing, the pulse of cerebrospinal fluid around your brain and spinal cord, creating what acoustic researchers call frequency entrainment, where your internal rhythms gradually synchronize with external ones, which is precisely why sleeping near running water leads to deeper, more restorative sleep cycles than sleeping in silence or with artificial white noise machines that lack these complex, living frequencies. The tea house wasn't built here by accident. The night river is part of the medicine. The tea master is preparing something you can smell before you can see, jasmine flowers, fresh ones, their white petals still closed tight against the night. Jasmine flowers contain benzyl acetate and linalool in concentrations that increase significantly after sunset, an evolutionary adaptation to attract night-pollinating moths, but these same compounds have been shown to increase activity in the parasympathetic nervous system in humans, the rest and digest system that counterbalances our fight or flight response, and remarkably, the effect is so pronounced that studies have measured improved cognitive performance on tests taken after exposure to jasmine scent compared to controls. suggesting that jasmine doesn't just relax you into stupor but rather into a state of alert calm, the kind of relaxation that actually sharpens rather than dulls your awareness, which is perhaps why Chinese tea masters have scented green tea with jasmine for over 1,000 years, understanding intuitively what we now measure with EEG machines and cortisol tests. The tea master places one flower beside your cup. You don't need to do anything with it. Its presence is enough. Watch the flower for a moment. Even cut from its stem, it continues to behave as if it's alive, because it is, in the way that matters for this moment. Plant cells remain viable for hours or even days after harvest, continuing to produce enzymes and volatile compounds, which is why the scent of the jasmine flower intensifies as you sit with it. The flower is still living its evening, still releasing its nocturnal perfume, still calling to moths that will never come, and in doing so it's calling to something in you too, that part that knows how to unfurl in darkness, how to offer sweetness without agenda, how to be beautiful for no reason except. That beauty is your nature. The tea master understands this. They don't arrange flowers to be looked at. They arrange them to be companions in the practice of simply being. The jasmine tea arrives, and it's been prepared differently, cooler water this time, a lower temperature that won't scald the delicate flowers. Green tea contains L-theanine, an amino acid that crosses the blood-brain barrier and increases alpha wave activity in the brain, the same waves associated with wakeful relaxation and meditation, while simultaneously increasing levels of serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. But here's what makes it remarkable: L-theanine also modulates the effects of caffeine, preventing the jittery anxiety often associated with stimulants while preserving the alertness and focus, creating what researchers describe as calm alertness, a state where you're simultaneously relaxed and attentive, which is exactly the state that meditation teachers spend years helping students achieve, and yet a simple bowl of properly prepared green tea with jasmine can induce it within 30 to 40 minutes of consumption. This is why the tea ceremony isn't just about drinking. It's about entering a state that the modern world has almost convinced us is impossible, to be both peaceful and present, both relaxed and aware. You've been in the tea house for over an hour now, and if you try to remember exactly when you arrived, the memory might feel distant, dreamlike. That's not an accident. Prolonged exposure to consistent, rhythmic environmental stimuli, like the sound of the river, the sight of steam rising, the ritual of tea preparation, induces what psychologists call transient hypofrontality, a state where the prefrontal cortex, responsible for executive function, time tracking, and self-criticism, temporarily quiets, allowing other brain regions associated with creativity, intuition, and present moment awareness to become more active. This is the neurological basis of what spiritual traditions call flow or presence, and it's why pilgrims journey to monasteries, why people seek out nature, why we build spaces like this tea house. We're not escaping our minds, we're giving our minds permission to redistribute their resources, to stop narrating and start experiencing. The tea master has created the conditions. Your nervous system has done the rest. Notice the weight of your body in the chair. When you first sat down, you might have held yourself slightly apart from it, not quite surrendering. But now, the human body contains mechanoreceptors in the skin that respond to sustained gentle pressure by triggering the release of oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, but more accurately understood as the safety hormone. It's what makes infants calm when held, what makes massage therapeutic, and what makes simply sitting still in a supportive chair for an extended period gradually shift your neurochemistry toward trust and openness. You don't need to be touched by another person to activate this system. You simply need to allow yourself to be held, even if what's holding you is gravity, wood, and your own decision to stop resisting the support that's being offered. The chair hasn't changed. You have. You've allowed yourself to be held. For the final tea of this hour, the tea master brings something unexpected, a blend of elderflower and linden blossom, flowers of midsummer somehow preserved into this winter evening. Elderflowers contain flavonoids and phenolic acids that stimulate the production of cytokines, signaling molecules that coordinate your immune system's response to pathogens, but they do something more subtle and remarkable. They induce what's called a mild diaphoretic effect, meaning they very gently increase perspiration, which is the body's most ancient form of detoxification, allowing your skin, your largest organ, to release not just metabolic waste but also stored stress hormones like cortisol that accumulate in tissue throughout the day. This is why traditional herbalists gave elderflower tea to people who were stuck emotionally as well as physically ill. They understood that sometimes the body needs permission to release what it's been holding, and a simple cup of flowers can be that permission, that gentle invitation to let go. The tea master serves it warm, not hot. This is a tea that works with your body's rhythms, not against them. The candle has burned down halfway. The river continues its patient conversation with the stones. You're an hour and some minutes into the evening, and there are still 40 secrets waiting to be shared, but none of them are urgent. They'll arrive when they arrive, the way this moment arrived, perfectly, inevitably, as if it could never have been otherwise. The evening has taken on a different quality now, denser, more textured, as if time itself has thickened into something you could almost touch. The tea master moves even more slowly than before, or perhaps you're simply noticing more. This next tea is prepared with something the tea master grows in small clay pots near the window, lemon verbena, its leaves so fragrant they perfume your fingers if you so much as brush against them. Lemon verbena, or Aloysia citrodora, contains citral and limonene in such high concentrations that even a single leaf can scent an entire room, and these compounds do something remarkable to human physiology. They inhibit the breakdown of acetylcholine in the brain, a neurotransmitter essential for learning, memory, and the regulation of REM sleep, which means that drinking lemon verbena tea in the evening doesn't just relax you, it actually prepares your brain for the kind of deep, restorative sleep where memories are consolidated and emotional experiences are processed and integrated. Traditional Spanish herbalists called it the student's herb because those who drank it regularly showed better recall and more stable moods, and while they didn't know about acetylcholine or REM architecture, they knew what worked, what helped the mind rest and reorganize itself during the dark hours. The tea master adds just 3 leaves to the pot. More would be overwhelming. This is a plant that teaches restraint. Watch how the tea master pours, not directly into the center of the cup, but in a slow spiral from the outer edge inward, the water tracing a pattern you could almost follow into somewhere else. The spiral is found throughout nature, in nautilus shells, unfurling ferns, the arms of galaxies, the cochlea of your inner ear, and when humans observe spiral patterns, particularly those that move inward or outward in a smooth, continuous motion, it activates the visual cortex in ways that promote what neuroscientists call soft fascination, a gentle capturing of attention that doesn't demand effort or create fatigue but rather allows the mind to rest while remaining engaged, which is precisely the state most conducive to the default mode network activation associated with insight, creativity, and the processing of complex emotions. The tea master isn't just pouring water, they're inscribing a pattern that your brain recognizes as fundamental, sacred, safe, the same pattern your body grew in when you were still in the womb, spiraling from a single cell into the person who now sits here, breathing steam, listening to the river's ancient voice. This is why tea ceremony is ceremony and not simply service. Every gesture carries meaning beyond function. The aroma of the lemon verbena is almost shocking in its brightness, a citrus note that somehow doesn't disturb the evening's quiet but illuminates it, the way a single star makes darkness visible. Citrus scents work through a mechanism called olfactory-induced emotional modulation, where limonene molecules bind to receptors in your nasal epithelium that send signals not just to your olfactory cortex but also directly to your amygdala and hippocampus, the brain regions that process emotional significance and context. What's remarkable is that citrus scents have been shown to reduce stress hormone levels even when people report that they don't particularly like the smell, suggesting that the effect operates below conscious preference, at a level where your limbic system recognizes citrus as a signal of freshness, cleanliness, renewal, perhaps because our evolutionary ancestors associated citrus with ripe fruit, with abundance, with the absence of rot or danger, and so even now, thousands of years removed from foraging, your ancient brain receives lemon verbena and whispers, "You are safe. Resources are available, you can stop scanning for threats and simply be." The tea master knows this. They chose this tea for this hour deliberately. Outside, if you look carefully, you might notice something moving on the river's surface, mist beginning to form, delicate as thought, substantial as breath. Mist forms when warm water meets cooler air, and the condensation that results creates millions of tiny water droplets that remain suspended in the air, each one refracting light and sound in unique ways. This creates what acoustic engineers call spatial diffusion, where sound waves bounce and scatter in complex patterns that eliminate harsh echoes while preserving the richness of the original sound. Which is why the river sounds different when mist rises, fuller, rounder, more enveloping, and why the tea house itself seems to breathe differently, the air taking on a quality that's not quite liquid but no longer entirely gaseous, something in between that blurs boundaries, softens edges, makes the distinction between inside and outside, between self and world, just a little less certain. You are breathing the river now. The river is breathing you. The boundary was always more permeable than you thought. The tea master prepares the next infusion with movements you've watched several times now, and yet each time feels like the first, pouring, steaming, waiting. This time, it's hawthorn berry and motherwort. Hawthorn berries contain oligomeric procyanidins, complex flavonoid compounds that dilate coronary blood vessels, literally increasing blood flow to the heart muscle itself, which has made hawthorn the cardiovascular tonic of choice in European herbalism for centuries. But beyond the physical heart, traditional Chinese medicine classified hawthorn as a shen tonic, shen being the term for spirit or consciousness that resides in the heart. Modern research suggests they weren't being metaphorical. Improved cardiac function leads to better heart rate variability, which correlates strongly with emotional resilience, the ability to recover from stress, and even measures of compassion and social connection, creating a feedback loop where caring for the physical heart quite literally opens the emotional heart, making you more capable of both receiving and offering care. The tea master places this cup before you with particular gentleness. This is heart medicine in every sense. And the motherwort, its name alone tells you something about how it's been regarded. Mothers. Worth. What is worthy of mothers, what mothers are worthy of? Motherwort, Leonurus cardiaca, contains leonurin, an alkaloid that acts on smooth muscle tissue throughout the body, gently relaxing tension in blood vessels, the uterus, and the digestive tract, but its most profound effect may be on what herbalists call emotional armor, that chronic tension we hold in the solar plexus and chest when we've learned that softness is dangerous. When we've been holding ourselves together for so long we've forgotten what it feels like to be held. Motherwort doesn't force relaxation but rather offers permission for it, working over days and weeks to help the body remember that it's safe to unclench, safe to soften, safe to need and to be needed without shame or collapse. Midwives gave it to new mothers not just for physical recovery but for the immense emotional transition of becoming responsible for another life, and perhaps all of us, regardless of whether we've birthed children, need motherwort sometimes, need permission to be both strong and soft, both capable and in need of care. The tea is slightly bitter, earthy, real. The tea master doesn't sweeten it. Some truths need to be tasted as they are. Notice your heartbeat now. You might not have been aware of it before, but in the quiet, with the hawthorn and motherwort working through your system, it becomes perceptible, not racing, not labored, just present. The human heart beats approximately 100,000 times per day, and yet we're rarely conscious of it unless something is wrong, which means we spend most of our lives divorced from the most fundamental rhythm of our existence. Meditation traditions across cultures use heartbeat awareness as an anchor for attention precisely because tuning into your heart creates what's called interoceptive awareness, the ability to perceive your internal state, and people with higher interoceptive awareness show greater emotional intelligence, better decision-making, and lower rates of anxiety and depression, not because they're thinking more clearly but because they're literally more in touch with themselves, more able to recognize what they need before it becomes a crisis. The tea ceremony, by creating space for this kind of attention, by giving you permission to simply sit and notice that you are alive, beating, breathing, is training a capacity that modern life actively works against. You are here. Your heart confirms it with every pulse. The mist has thickened on the river now. You can see it moving, drifting, following currents invisible to the eye but real as bone. Mist particles, because they're so small, typically between 1 and 40 microns in diameter, remain suspended in air for extended periods, creating what meteorologists call a colloidal suspension, and these suspended particles catch and hold scent molecules from the environment, creating pockets of concentrated aroma that drift and swirl unpredictably. This is why mist carries the smell of the river, the earth, the surrounding vegetation so much more intensely than clear air. It's holding these molecular signatures in suspension the way memory holds experience, and when that scent-laden mist drifts through the open windows of the tea house, it brings with it the full chemical signature of this place, this moment, this unrepeatable configuration of water and air and growing things, essentially creating an aromatic portrait of exactly where and when you are that your olfactory system will encode into long-term memory, which is why, years from now, if you smell that particular combination of river water and mist and night-blooming flowers, you'll be instantly transported back to this evening, this tea house, this version of yourself who sat here and let the world be exactly as it was. The tea master opens the window a little wider. The mist enters like a guest. For this next tea, something wilder, nettles, foraged from the riverbank, and raspberry leaf, both dried at the peak of summer and stored in amber jars away from light. Stinging nettle contains more protein by weight than most vegetables, along with significant amounts of iron, calcium, and magnesium, but what makes it remarkable for evening tea is its high content of chlorophyll and silica, compounds that work synergistically to support what herbalists call deep nutrition, not just the addition of vitamins and minerals but the restoration of the body's fundamental capacity to absorb and utilize nutrients at the cellular level. Chronic stress depletes mineral reserves rapidly, and most people in modern life are running on a deficit they don't even recognize until it becomes severe, experiencing fatigue, mood instability, and weakened immunity that they attribute to other causes while their cells are literally starving for basics like magnesium, which is required for over 300 enzymatic reactions in the body. Nettle doesn't cure or fix in the pharmaceutical sense, it nourishes at such a fundamental level that the body can begin to repair itself, given the raw materials it's been missing, which is perhaps why traditional herbalists prescribed nettle not for specific diseases but for what they called depletion of the vital force, understanding that sometimes people aren't sick, they're just profoundly under-resourced. The tea master serves this one in a larger cup. This is medicine you can drink deeply. The raspberry leaf floats on the surface, a small green boat on a dark sea. The tea master explains that this leaf comes from the wild raspberries that grow where the river bends. Raspberry leaf contains fragorine, a compound that tones smooth muscle tissue throughout the body, particularly in the pelvic region, but its effects extend far beyond the reproductive system to include the muscles of the bladder, the lower digestive tract, and even the muscles of the lower back, creating what physical therapists call neuromuscular facilitation, where toning one muscle group sends signals through the nervous system that improve tone and coordination in connected areas. This is why raspberry leaf has been used for centuries, not just for childbirth preparation but for anyone experiencing lower back pain, digestive irregularity, or the kind of deep, structural tension that no amount of stretching seems to release. It's working at the level of nerve-muscle communication, helping your body remember patterns of support and strength that stress and poor posture have caused it to forget. You might not notice anything dramatic after one cup, but the tea master has been drinking this weekly for decades, and at 73 years old, moves with the ease of someone half that age, still bending to tend the garden, still sitting in full lotus when the meditation bell rings at dawn. The tea is slightly astringent, grounding, substantial. It tastes like the earth itself decided to become drinkable. Over an hour has passed since you first settled in. The candle flame bends and straightens, bends and straightens. The river murmurs its endless one-word poem. There are still 20 secrets left, waiting in the steam, in the darkness, in the space between one breath and the next. You've been here long enough now that leaving seems almost unimaginable, not because you're trapped, but because the world beyond these walls has become the dream, and this room, this river, this steam rising in candlelight has become the only reality that matters. The tea master is preparing something they reserve for the deepest part of the evening: blue lotus flowers, dried petals that still hold their impossible color even months after harvest, paired with a few seeds of cardamom. Blue lotus, Nymphea caerulea, contains aporphine and luciferine, alkaloids that act as dopamine receptor modulators, creating a state that ancient Egyptians described as divine intoxication, but which modern neuroscience would characterize as enhanced dopaminergic activity in the nucleus accumbens and ventral tegmental area, the brain's reward and motivation centers, without the tolerance-building or addictive properties of synthetic dopamine agonists. What this means in lived experience is a gentle lifting of mood, a sense of quiet euphoria and openness to beauty, a softening of the harsh self-criticism and rumination that so often dominates our mental landscape, and perhaps most remarkably, an increased ability to experience pleasure from simple things: the warmth of the cup, the sound of the river, the play of candlelight on water, essentially resetting what psychologists call your hedonic set point. Your baseline capacity for contentment, which in most people has been dulled by chronic stress, overstimulation, and the constant bombardment of artificial rewards that hijack these same neural pathways. The tea master places 2 petals in the pot. They curl as the hot water touches them, as if remembering they were once alive in the Nile, sacred to priests who understood plants as technologies of consciousness. The cardamom seeds crack open in the heat, releasing an aroma so complex it seems to contain multitudes, sweet, sharp, warm, green all at once. Cardamom contains cineol, also known as eucalyptol, a compound that crosses the blood-brain barrier and has been shown to increase cerebral blood flow by up to 15% while simultaneously reducing inflammatory markers throughout the central nervous system. This dual action, more blood carrying oxygen and nutrients to brain tissue, less inflammation impeding cellular function, creates optimal conditions for what neuroscientists call cognitive clarity, a state where thoughts arise more easily, connections form more readily, and the fog that often clouds our thinking simply lifts without effort or force. Traditional Ayurvedic texts classified cardamom as sattvic, meaning it promotes clarity, lightness, and harmony, and while those physicians 3,000 years ago didn't have fMRI machines to measure blood flow or assays to detect inflammatory cytokines, they recognized the subjective experience of a mind that suddenly remembers how to think clearly, how to see connections, how to understand without struggle what moments before seemed impenetrably complex. The tea master grinds the cardamom fresh for each pot. Pre-ground loses its essence within days. This is medicine that demands freshness, demands presence, demands that you meet it in its full potency or not at all. As you lift the cup, blue lotus and cardamom mingling in steam, notice how the scent alone changes something in you, even before the first sip touches your lips. The olfactory bulb, which processes smell, is part of the limbic system and has direct neural connections to the amygdala and hippocampus that don't require cortical processing, which means scent bypasses rational thought entirely and accesses emotion and memory directly. This is why a smell can transport you instantly to childhood, why certain aromas trigger tears or joy before you consciously register what you're smelling, and why aromatherapy, despite being dismissed by some as pseudoscience, has measurable effects on blood pressure, heart rate, cortisol levels, and subjective well-being in double-blind studies. You cannot think your way out of responding to scent because scent never enters through the thinking parts of your brain. It goes straight to the feeling centers, to the memory centers, to the parts of you that existed long before language, long before self-consciousness. Back to when you were a newborn mammal whose entire world was navigated by smell and touch and the sound of your mother's heartbeat. The tea master knows this. They choose each herb not just for what it does in your bloodstream but for what it does in your oldest brain, the part that remembers how to simply be an animal, breathing, sensing, alive. The river's voice has changed again. Or perhaps you're hearing it differently now, after all these teas, all this stillness, all this practiced attention to what usually goes unnoticed. Water flowing over stones creates what physicists call turbulent flow, characterized by chaotic, unpredictable eddies and vortices that generate a complex acoustic signature spanning multiple frequencies simultaneously. This chaotic but patterned sound has been shown in recent studies to reduce activity in the brain's default mode network, the network responsible for self-referential thinking, rumination, and the constant narrative of I, me, mine that dominates most waking consciousness. Essentially allowing you to experience what Buddhist practitioners call non-self, or what psychologists might term ego dissolution, a temporary quieting of the separate self that usually stands between you and direct experience of reality. This is not dissociation or disconnection but rather a more primary form of connection, where instead of standing apart from the river thinking about the river, you simply are with the river, perceiving without the constant mediation of the chattering mind that needs to name, categorize, judge, and narrate everything it encounters. You are not listening to the river anymore. You are the listening itself. The boundary dissolved somewhere in the last hour, so gradually you didn't notice when it happened. The tea master is preparing the next blend now, mugwort and skullcap, herbs that carry the night in their very names, their very natures. Mugwort, Artemisia vulgaris, has been called the dream herb across cultures because it contains thujone and other volatile oils that appear to increase the vividness and memorability of dreams, possibly by enhancing REM sleep and increasing acetylcholine activity in the brain during sleep cycles. People who drink mugwort tea before bed consistently report more colorful, narrative-rich dreams that they can recall in detail upon waking, and while the mechanism isn't fully understood. Traditional herbalists didn't need mechanism, they needed results, and they observed that mugwort seemed to thin the veil between waking and dreaming consciousness, making it easier to remember what the night mind knows, what gets processed and revealed when the day mind finally stops its constant surveillance and control. Shamanic traditions across Europe, Asia, And the Americas independently discovered mugwort and used it for vision work, for prophecy, for accessing the wisdom that lives in symbol and image rather than in linear thought, understanding that sometimes the psyche needs to speak in the language of dreams because some truths cannot fit into the narrow channel of waking logic. The tea master warns you, drink this tea and tonight you will dream. Not might. Will. The plant insists on it. The skullcap that joins the mugwort is equally potent, though it works through entirely different pathways, creating a synergy that herbalists call a formula rather than just a mixture. Skullcap, Scutellaria lateriflora, contains bakelin and scutellarin, flavonoid compounds that bind to benzodiazepine receptors in the brain, the same receptors targeted by pharmaceutical anti-anxiety medications, but unlike benzodiazepines, which can create dependency, tolerance, and cognitive impairment, skullcap's flavonoids modulate these receptors gently, reducing excessive neural firing in the anxiety circuits without suppressing healthy emotional responses or dulling cognitive function. The result is what herbalists describe as taking the edge off or turning down the volume on anxiety. You don't become emotionally numb or disconnected, you simply find that the spiral of anxious thoughts that usually grabs you and pulls you down loses its grip, becomes something you can observe rather than something that observes you, becomes weather passing through rather than the climate you must inhabit. Native American herbalists called skullcap mad dog weed and used it to calm people experiencing extreme agitation, psychotic breaks, or what we would now recognize as panic attacks, and while those are dramatic applications, the plant works just as well for the quieter madness of ordinary anxiety, the constant low-level activation that most people carry so habitually they think it's normal, think it's just who they are, rather than recognizing it as a nervous system stuck in a chronic state of mild alarm. The tea master serves this blend in a wide, shallow cup so you can see the herbs floating, settling, releasing their medicine into the water like secrets being told. Look at the surface of the tea. Do you see how the steam rises not in a uniform cloud but in delicate, spiraling columns that appear and disappear like thoughts arising in meditation? Steam columns form due to convection currents where hot water at different temperatures creates density gradients that drive upward flow in specific pathways, and these convection cells organize themselves into patterns that mathematicians describe as Banach cells, stable, self-organizing structures that emerge spontaneously from chaos, creating ordered patterns without any external organizing force. This same self-organization appears at every scale of nature, from the convection cells in stars to the patterns of vegetation in desert ecosystems to the way neurons organize themselves into functional networks in the developing brain, suggesting something profound about how order emerges from apparent randomness, how pattern finds its way into being without blueprint or design, simply by following the intrinsic properties of matter and energy in relationship. Watching steam rise from tea, you are watching the same principle that organized the cosmos, and perhaps this is why the tea ceremony has always been considered a meditation. It reveals fundamental truths about existence through the simplest possible medium: hot water, dried plants, attention. The tea master watches the steam with you, silent, and somehow the watching together is its own form of teaching, its own form of communion. Outside, the mist has become so thick that the river is invisible now, present only as sound, as coolness in the air, as the source of this vapor that blurs all boundaries. Dense mist creates what atmospheric scientists call acoustic impedance matching, where the water droplets suspended in air have acoustic properties intermediate between liquid water and air, causing sound waves to propagate differently. Lower frequencies travel further and with less distortion, while high frequencies scatter and dissipate rapidly. This means that in heavy mist, you hear the fundamental tones of the river, its deepest voice, while the surface chatter fades away, creating a sound environment that naturally draws your attention to the profound rather than the superficial, to the depths rather than the surface disturbances. This acoustic filtering happens naturally, without technology, without intention, simply as a consequence of physics, and yet the effect on human consciousness is unmistakable. The world becomes more serious, more mysterious, more worthy of reverence when mist obscures the visual and leaves you with only the essential sounds, the foundational tones, the bass note of existence continuing beneath all the higher frequency noise of daily life. The tea master moves to close the window slightly, not to shut out the mist, but to keep the room from becoming uncomfortably cold. They are managing threshold spaces, keeping you in that liminal zone where outside and inside interpenetrate without either dominating. The next tea arrives without announcement. You didn't see the tea master prepare it, and yet here it is, ginger root and licorice, the aroma bold enough to pull you back from wherever you drifted. Fresh ginger contains gingerol, a compound that converts during drying into shogal and zingerone, and these compounds have a unique quality among herbal medicines. They increase the bioavailability of other compounds, essentially acting as what pharmacologists call enzyme inhibitors, that slow the breakdown of medicinal constituents in the liver and digestive tract, allowing therapeutic compounds to remain in your system longer and at higher concentrations. This is why ginger appears in so many traditional herbal formulas across cultures. It's not just medicine itself but a medicine potentiator, a carrier that helps everything else work better, penetrate deeper, last longer in the body. Chinese herbalists called ginger the universal guide herb, because it directs other herbs to where they need to go in the body, warming the digestion, increasing circulation, opening pathways that might otherwise remain closed, and in Ayurvedic medicine, ginger is called Vishwabhasaj, meaning universal medicine, not because it cures everything but because it makes the body more receptive to healing, more able to absorb and utilize whatever other medicines, herbal or pharmaceutical, are being administered. The ginger is sliced thick, still showing its fibrous structure, still recognizably root, earth, growing thing rather than powder in a capsule. The licorice that steeps with the ginger is different from what most people know as licorice. This is the root itself, not the candy, though it carries that same distinctive sweetness. Licorice root contains glycyrrhizin, a compound 50 times sweeter than sugar but with entirely different metabolic effects. Instead of spiking blood glucose and insulin, glycyrrhizin modulates cortisol metabolism by inhibiting the enzyme that breaks down cortisol in the kidneys, effectively prolonging the presence of your body's own stress response hormone in a way that helps people with chronic fatigue, adrenal exhaustion, or what herbalists call burnt-out nervous system maintain better energy and stress resilience. But here's the paradox that makes licorice so fascinating. The same compound that extends cortisol's presence in the body also has strong anti-inflammatory properties, meaning it helps you maintain stress hormones while preventing those same hormones from creating the inflammatory damage they usually cause. It's simultaneously supporting the stress response and protecting you from its harmful effects, walking a knife edge of physiological balance that demonstrates how herbal medicine often works not by pushing the body in one direction or another but by helping it maintain dynamic equilibrium even under challenging conditions. Traditional Chinese medicine classified licorice as a harmonizing herb that goes into almost every formula, and modern pharmacology confirms this ancient wisdom. Licorice literally helps opposing forces coexist in productive balance rather than destructive conflict. The tea is sweet without sugar, warm without burn, strong without harshness. It tastes like paradox resolved into coherence. You've been in the tea house for nearly an hour and a half now, and if someone asked you to describe how you feel, you might struggle to find words, not because you feel nothing but because you feel something for which contemporary language has few terms. The Japanese language contains the word yugen, which points to an awareness of the universe that triggers emotional responses too deep and mysterious for words, a sense of the profound beauty of existence that borders on melancholy because such beauty is always temporary, always passing. This is not depression but rather its opposite, a heightened appreciation born from recognizing impermanence, a sweetness intensified by awareness that this moment, This exact configuration of candlelight and mist and river sound in your own breathing body will never exist again in precisely this way. Western psychology has begun to recognize states like this under the term awe, showing that experiences of vastness, mystery, and beauty literally alter time perception, making moments feel both elongated and compressed simultaneously, both infinitely rich and impossibly brief. And people who regularly cultivate awe show improved well-being, greater life satisfaction, more pro-social behavior, and even measurable changes in inflammatory markers, suggesting that the soul states that poets and mystics have always celebrated actually have concrete effects on physical health, that beauty is not luxury but necessity, that these evenings in tea houses are not escapes from reality but confrontations with a deeper reality that our utilitarian culture has trained us to overlook. The tea master continues their work, unhurried, creating the conditions for Yugen to arise, for the mysterious and profound to make itself felt, not through words or explanations but through the cumulative effect of beauty repeated, attention sustained, presence honored. The candle has burned low. The river murmurs its one word over and over, and that word is enough. 10 more secrets remain, but they're in no hurry. They've waited thousands of years already. They can wait a few more minutes, until you're ready, until the moment is right, until the steam rises in just that certain way that means, now. Listen now. The final teachings are approaching. The night has deepened into something beyond night, not darkness but a kind of luminous depth, as if you've descended so far into the evening that you've reached a place where ordinary categories no longer apply. The tea master lights a fresh candle from the dying flame of the old one. Continuity. Nothing is lost, only transformed. For this final hour's first offering, the tea master brings something rare, reishi mushroom slices and astragalus root, medicines that work not in moments but across time, building something in you that will outlast this evening. Reishi mushroom, Ganoderma lucidum, contains polysaccharides and triterpenes that modulate the immune system in a way that Western medicine is only beginning to understand. Rather than simply boosting or suppressing immune function, reishi acts as what immunologists call a biological response modifier, helping the immune system distinguish more accurately between actual threats and harmless stimuli, essentially recalibrating the entire immune response so it becomes more intelligent, more discerning, less likely to attack the body's own tissues in autoimmune reactions or to overreact to benign environmental triggers in allergic responses. Traditional Chinese medicine called reishi the mushroom of immortality, and reserved it for emperors, not because it prevents death but because it appears to slow the accumulation of cellular damage that we call aging, supporting the deep repair mechanisms that run constantly beneath conscious awareness, the midnight maintenance crews of the body that work best when you're calm, when cortisol is low, when the parasympathetic nervous system has permission to do its patient, essential work of keeping entropy at bay. The mushroom slices float in the pot like small boats, dark against the lighter water, releasing compounds that have been revered for over 2,000 years, and will continue to work in your system for days after tonight ends. The astragalus root that accompanies the reishi looks like strips of yellow wood, unassuming, easily mistaken for something decorative rather than medicinal, and yet within these fibers lies something remarkable. Astragalus membranaceus contains astragalosides and flavonoids that have been shown in laboratory studies to activate telomerase, the enzyme responsible for maintaining telomeres, the protective caps on the ends of chromosomes that shorten with each cell division and whose length is directly correlated with cellular age. While the research is still emerging and cautious, the possibility that a simple root could influence the most fundamental mechanism of aging is both humbling and awe-inspiring. suggesting that what traditional herbalists called tonics, or adaptogens, or longevity herbs, weren't engaging in wishful thinking but were observing real effects that occur at the deepest levels of cellular biology, effects that don't manifest as dramatic cures or sudden healing but as a subtle shifting of the trajectory, a gentle bending of the arc toward resilience, vitality, sustained function across decades rather than years. Astragalus works in the same time scale as a tree growing. Slowly, persistently, adding ring after ring, and you cannot see the difference one cup makes, but the body knows, the cells know, something ancient and patient in you recognizes this medicine and responds not with immediate gratification but with a whispered promise. I will help you last, I will help you endure, I will help you remain yourself even as time attempts to unmake you. The tea master has been drinking astragalus for 40 years. It shows not in any single feature but in an overall quality of vitality that defies the calendar. This tea tastes different from all the others, more subtle, almost neutral, with just a whisper of sweetness and a depth that reveals itself only if you pay close attention, only if you bring the same quality of awareness to tasting that you've been cultivating all evening. The human tongue contains approximately 10,000 taste buds, each one a cluster of 50 to 150 taste receptor cells that regenerate every 10 to 14 days, making your sense of taste one of the few sensory systems that continuously renews itself throughout life. However, the ability to detect subtle flavors depends not just on the presence of taste buds but on attention. Studies using fMRI show that when people consciously attend to taste, areas of the brain involved in flavor processing show significantly more activation than when the same substances are consumed without attention, meaning that mindful tasting literally allows you to perceive flavors that mindless consumption would miss entirely. This is why the tea ceremony emphasizes presence, slowness, attention, not as aesthetic preference but as practical necessity, as the only way to actually experience what's being offered. To receive the full communication from plant to person that happens through taste when both parties are fully present, when the taster is not distracted by thoughts of past or future but is simply here, now, tongue and tea meeting in this moment that will never come again. The tea master watches you taste, and you have the sense they can tell whether you're really tasting or just drinking, whether you're here or still partly somewhere else, planning, remembering, resisting, escaping. The river's voice has become so familiar now that you hear it even in the silence between sounds, the way you might hear a beloved person's voice in memory, the way certain rhythms become part of your internal landscape. Prolonged exposure to natural rhythmic sounds creates what neuroscientists call neural entrainment, where the electrical rhythms of your brain, the oscillating patterns of neuronal firing that create consciousness itself, begin to synchronize with the external rhythm. This isn't metaphor but measurable phenomenon. EEG studies show that people exposed to rhythmic natural sounds for 60 minutes or more show increased coherence between different brain regions, with the dominant frequencies in their brain activity shifting to match the fundamental frequencies of the sound they're hearing. Essentially, the river has been slowly tuning your brain all evening, adjusting your neural oscillations the way a piano tuner adjusts strings, bringing disparate parts of your nervous system into harmony with each other and with the environment, creating a state of coherence that feels subjectively like peace, like clarity, like coming home to yourself after a long absence, and this coherence persists. People show altered brain rhythms for hours or even days after such experiences, carrying the river's rhythm with them back into the world, a secret frequency that continues to play beneath the noise of ordinary life. You are not the same person who walked into this tea house 2 hours ago. The river has rewritten something in you at the level of electricity, of rhythm, of the fundamental oscillations that create self. The tea master prepares something different now, not a tea exactly, but a warm broth made from miso paste and seaweed, a sudden shift toward the savory, toward salt and ocean even here beside the river. Miso, created through the fermentation of soybeans with koji mold over months or years, contains millions of beneficial bacteria per gram, a living ecosystem of lactobacillus, bifidobacterium, and other probiotic strains that, when consumed, temporarily colonize your digestive tract and influence not just digestion but mood, immunity, and even cognitive function through what scientists call the gut-brain axis, a bidirectional communication network between your intestinal microbiome and your central nervous system that operates through multiple pathways including the vagus nerve, immune signaling molecules, and the direct production of neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine by gut bacteria. What this means is that drinking miso broth isn't just nourishing your body with protein and minerals. It's introducing living organisms that will take up temporary residence in your gut and from there send signals that influence your mental state, your emotional resilience, your inflammatory responses, essentially making you a temporarily different ecosystem, a collaboration between human cells and bacterial cells that together create the phenomenon you call yourself. Traditional Japanese culture understood this intuitively, beginning each day with miso soup, understanding that starting the day by feeding and inoculating your gut flora was as important as any other morning practice, perhaps more important than most. The broth is simple, warm, alive. You can almost feel it greeting your internal ecosystem, ancient bacteria meeting your personal microbiome in a conversation that predates humanity itself. The seaweed floating in the broth, wakame, catches the candlelight, its dark green edges translucent, delicate despite coming from the ocean's depths, despite surviving in cold currents and salt. Seaweed contains iodine in concentrations far higher than any land plant because it absorbs this element directly from seawater where it's abundant, and iodine is essential for thyroid hormone production. The thyroid regulates metabolism, energy production, body temperature, and profoundly influences mood and cognitive function. Yet iodine deficiency remains surprisingly common even in developed countries due to depleted soil and changing dietary patterns. What makes seaweed remarkable is not just its iodine content but the presence of compounds called fucoidins, complex sulfated polysaccharides that modulate inflammation, support detoxification, and appear to protect cells from radiation damage, making seaweed one of the few foods that was actively distributed to populations after nuclear incidents because of its demonstrated protective effects. Traditional coastal cultures that consumed seaweed daily showed lower rates of certain cancers, better thyroid function, and longer lifespans than inland populations, and while many factors contributed to these outcomes, modern research increasingly suggests that regular seaweed consumption provides a kind of baseline protective effect, a cellular resilience that comes from compounds that land plants never evolved because they never needed to survive in the ocean's harsh, mineral-rich, radiation-exposed environment. The tea master explains that this seaweed was harvested by hand from cold northern waters, dried in the sun, and stored in darkness to preserve its volatile compounds. Even here, even in this simple broth, there is ceremony, there is intention, there is the honoring of the gift. Notice how your body feels now compared to when you first arrived. Don't think about it, just scan through yourself with attention, witnessing without judgment what has shifted. The human body replaces approximately 330 billion cells per day, meaning that in the 2 hours you've been here, roughly 27.5 billion of your cells have died and been replaced with new ones. You are literally not the same physical entity that walked through the door, not metaphorically but actually. New cells have been born, old cells have been broken down and recycled, proteins have been synthesized, membranes have been repaired, and every single one of these microscopic acts of creation and destruction has occurred in the biochemical environment created by what you've consumed, breathed, heard, and felt tonight. The teas, the steam, the river's rhythm, the candlelight, the mist-laden air, all of these have influenced which genes were expressed in those new cells, which proteins were prioritized in their construction, which neural connections were strengthened or pruned in your brain's constant remodeling. You cannot step in the same river twice, the ancient philosopher said, but it's equally true that you cannot be the same person twice. You are a process, not a thing, a verb masquerading as a noun, and tonight that process has been guided by intention, by beauty, by compounds that have been refined over millions of years of evolution to speak to human cells in their own chemical language. The tea master knows this without knowing the science. They know it in their bones, in their decades of watching people arrive tense and leave softened, arrive fragmented and leave coherent, arrive lost and leave found, even if only temporarily, even if only until the world's noise drowns out the river's whisper again. For the penultimate tea, something that marks the approaching end, Schisandra berries, which traditional Chinese medicine calls Wu Wei Zi, the five-flavor fruit, because it contains all five basic tastes: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and pungent. Schisandra chinensis contains lignans including schizandrin that protect the liver from damage, enhance detoxification, and increase the production of glutathione, the body's master antioxidant, often called the mother of all antioxidants, because it recycles other antioxidants like vitamin C and E, allowing them to continue functioning rather than being consumed and discarded. But what makes Schisandra truly remarkable is that it's an adaptogen that works specifically on what herbalists call essence, or jing, the fundamental vitality that determines not just lifespan but health span, the quality of those years, the resilience and regenerative capacity that allows some people to remain vigorous into old age while others decline prematurely. Modern research suggests this may relate to Schisandra's effects on mitochondrial function, supporting the cellular power plants that produce energy and whose dysfunction is implicated in virtually every age-related disease. Russian scientists studied Schisandra extensively in the mid-20th century, giving it to soldiers, athletes, and factory workers, finding that it improved endurance, mental clarity, and stress resilience without the crash that follows stimulants. And while the research was sometimes questionable methodologically, the lived experience of millions of people across Asia who have consumed Schisandra for generations provides its own form of evidence. This is a plant that helps you last, that supports the deep reserves. That doesn't give you energy so much as it helps you access the energy you already have but have forgotten how to reach. The berries are tart, complex, challenging, not a tea that flatters or soothes but one that wakes something up, reminds you that you contain more capacity than you usually access. The tea master is preparing the final tea now. You can sense it in the way they move, slightly slower, with an additional layer of care, the way someone handles the last page of a beloved book they're reading for the first time. The final tea is simply hot water with a single slice of fresh lemon, and in its simplicity lies a teaching. After all the complex herbs, the layered flavors, the sophisticated compounds and ancient wisdom, sometimes what you need most is the most basic thing: warm water, a bit of citrus, the acknowledgement that you don't always need more, that sometimes the best medicine is almost no medicine at all, just hydration, just warmth, just a gesture of care so simple that it almost disappears into ordinariness, except that after 2 hours of heightened awareness, of cultivated attention, of practiced presence, nothing is ordinary anymore. The lemon slice floats in the clear water, its oils rising to the surface, creating tiny iridescent swirls that catch the candle flame, and in this you can see everything you've learned tonight, that beauty requires nothing but attention, that complexity often obscures what simplicity reveals, that the most profound experiences are usually the quietest ones, the ones that don't announce themselves or demand recognition but simply offer themselves, humbly, and wait to be noticed by anyone who has learned how to see. The tea master places this final cup before you with both hands, a bow, a moment of eye contact that says, "This is the teaching, this is what you take with you, not the fancy herbs or the exotic knowledge, but the capacity to find the sacred in a cup of warm water with lemon, to bring this quality of attention to everything, to make every moment a tea ceremony if you choose, if you remember. If you don't let the world convince you that reverence is reserved for special occasions rather than being the appropriate response to the simple fact of being alive." Outside, the mist is beginning to thin. Dawn is still hours away, but the deep middle of the night has passed. The river sounds different again, not louder or softer, just different, as if it knows that endings are also beginnings, that every moment something dies and something is born. The concept of time as linear, past, present, future strung out like beads on a wire, is a useful fiction but not how time actually operates at the level of experience. Neuroscience shows that your brain doesn't experience time directly but constructs it from memory and anticipation, from the patterns it detects in change, and in states of deep presence like meditation or flow or the heightened awareness cultivated in a tea ceremony, the brain's time construction machinery quiets, creating what subjects describe as timelessness or eternal now, not because time has stopped but because the mental processes that create the sensation of time passing have been suspended. What you've experienced in these 2 hours might feel like 10 minutes or 10 years depending on how you reflect on it later. And both perceptions would be equally valid because time is not an objective container you move through but a subjective construction your mind creates, and in changing your state of consciousness, you literally change the structure of time itself, at least as you experience it. The ancient tea masters knew this, built ceremonies that lasted hours specifically to break people out of clock time and into what the Greeks called kairos, the right time, the fullness of time. Time as quality rather than quantity, time as depth rather than duration. You have been outside of time tonight. You will return to it when you leave, but something in you will remember that time is not the tyrant it pretends to be, that there are cracks in its authority where you can slip through into something more real. The tea master begins to clear the cups slowly, without haste, each movement deliberate. They are not rushing you. The door is not locked. You are free to leave whenever you choose. And yet there is a rightness to this moment of conclusion, a completeness, a sense that the ceremony that began when you walked through the door is now reaching its natural end, the way a piece of music resolves to its final chord not because time has run out but because the music has said what it came to say. You will leave this tea house and return to your life, and everything will be exactly as it was. The same problems, the same responsibilities, the same world with its noise and demands and relentless pace, and yet you will not be the same, not because you've learned some secret or achieved some permanent transformation, but because you've had a direct, embodied experience of a different way of being. And that experience becomes a reference point, a memory that your nervous system can return to, a proof that calm is possible, that presence is accessible, that beneath all the chaos and urgency there is still the river, still the steam rising, still the simple ceremony of plant and water and attention meeting in a moment that asks nothing of you except that you be here, fully, without reservation or defense. This is not escape from reality but contact with a deeper reality. And while you cannot live in the tea house permanently, you carry its teaching with you in your very cells, in the new neural pathways that have been strengthened tonight, in the muscle memory of shoulders dropping and breath deepening, in the knowledge, not intellectual but somatic, not believed but known, that you are always just a few conscious breaths away from coming home to yourself, that the ceremony is not in the tea house but in the quality of attention you bring to anything, and that this attention is not something you must achieve or earn but something you already have, right now, always available, waiting only for you to remember, to choose, to begin again. The tea master bows. You bow. The river continues its one-word poem. 100 facts about herbs and steam and water have been shared, but the real teaching was always beyond facts, beyond words, in the space between the cup and the lips, between the breath and the silence, between who you were when you arrived and who you are now, in this moment, which is the only moment there ever is.